Imagine holding in your hand a simple piece of American change, something you may pass along in a store without a second thought. Yet within that coin lies a story of artistry, history, economics, and national pride. The Washington Quarter of 1987 is one such coin. And today we unravel its complete history in detail, a history so rich that by the end of this journey, you will never look at a quarter the same way again. The Washington Quarter series itself began in 1932 as a tribute to George Washington, the first president of the United States, marking the bicentennial of his birth. John Flanagan's design, featuring Washington's left-facing portrait, was selected and would become one of the most enduring designs in American coinage. The 1987 quarter belongs to that historic lineage, continuing the design that had by then become a fixture in pockets, purses, and cash registers across America. The obverse of the 1987 quarter bears the iconic image of Washington modeled after the bust created in 1785 by French sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon, a design choice that was intended to capture the authentic likeness of the man who shaped the foundation of the nation. Above his portrait, the word "Liberty" is engraved, reminding Americans of the ideals upon which the country was built. To the left, the national motto, "In God We Trust," is etched firmly, standing as a declaration of faith and tradition, while beneath the portrait, the year 1987 is placed, a marker of time that roots the coin in its specific historical context. Turning to the reverse, the 1987 quarter features the heraldic eagle with outstretched wings, clutching arrows, and an olive branch, a classic symbol of American power and peace designed to represent the nation's balance between military readiness and its dedication to diplomacy. The inscriptions "United States of America" and "E Pluribus Unum," together with the denomination $quarter, create a message of national identity, unity, and value. This design had been in place since the coin's first release, and in 1987, it continued to project the values of a nation that was experiencing significant economic, political, and cultural transformations. The year 1987 was notable in the history of the United States. The country was in the later years of the Reagan presidency, and the economy was marked by both booming growth and looming challenges, with events such as the stock market crash in October that year, reminding Americans of financial uncertainty. The Washington Quarter of 1987 circulated in this climate, moving from hand to hand as people bought goods, paid for services, and saved change. It became part of everyday life, a silent witness to the realities of the American people. From a numismatic perspective, the 1987 Washington Quarter was produced at multiple mints, primarily the Philadelphia Mint, identified by the absence of a mint mark, and the Denver Mint, identified by the D mark placed to the right of Washington's ponytail. The San Francisco Mint also struck proof coins for collectors carrying the S mint mark. These proof issues were of higher quality, struck on specially prepared planchets with polished dies, producing sharp details and mirrored finishes appealing to coin collectors who valued them both for their beauty and their role in completing proof sets. The composition of the 1987 quarter continued the clad standard that had been adopted in 1965 following the Coinage Act, which removed silver from circulating quarters due to rising silver prices. Instead, the coins were made of a copper-nickel-clad sandwich structure with outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core. This change, which had been controversial in the mid-1960s, was by 1987 fully accepted by the public, though collectors always remembered the beauty and intrinsic value of the pre-1965 silver quarters. The 1987 issue represented the modern practical reality of United States coinage, a balance between affordability, durability, and circulation needs. In terms of mintage numbers, the Philadelphia and Denver mints each produced hundreds of millions of quarters in 1987, ensuring widespread circulation across the nation. The San Francisco Mint struck smaller numbers of proof coins, specifically intended for inclusion in collector sets as such, while the vast majority of 1987 quarters hold only face value today in circulated condition. Higher-grade uncirculated examples or pristine proof coins can command premiums in the numismatic marketplace. The true value for collectors often lies not only in the monetary worth, but in the condition, rarity, and historical narrative tied to each coin. The design of the Washington quarter in 1987 remained unchanged, but its longevity was a subject of debate within the numismatic community. Some believed it was time to update the design, as the coin had been circulating for over 5 decades. Others argued that the Washington portrait and eagle reverse had become iconic symbols too deeply rooted in American culture to be replaced indeed. The Washington quarter design would persist for another decade before the 50-state quarters program launched in 1999, bringing dramatic changes to the reverse designs and capturing the imagination of millions of Americans. The 1987 quarter therefore represents a late chapter in the long-running original Washington quarter series that stretched from 1932 to 1998, examining the cultural role of the quarter in 1987 also reveals fascinating insights. By that time, vending machines, arcade games, and payphones all relied heavily on quarters as the standard unit of operation. This gave the coin an outsized importance in daily life beyond its face value. A single quarter could grant you a phone call, a video game, a snack from a machine, or even serve as the deciding coin flip in moments of chance and decision-making. The 1987 Washington quarter, therefore, was not only a piece of money, but also an essential token of American culture woven into the fabric of social and economic interactions. Collectors today often seek the 1987 quarter in high mint state grades, where luster, sharp strike, and absence of wear elevate the coin's beauty. Such coins may come from original bankrolls, mint sets, or proof sets, and finding pristine examples can be a rewarding pursuit for numismatists who value condition rarity and the connection to American history. Some error coins from the year, such as off-center strikes, double dies, or clipped planchets, add an extra layer of intrigue and can be far more valuable than regular issues, providing collectors with exciting challenges in their search to truly appreciate the 1987 Washington. Quarter one must see it as more than a small piece of metal. It is a reflection of American heritage, the continuation of a design that honored the founding father George Washington, the embodiment of national symbols like the eagle and the mottos, of unity and faith, and a participant in the everyday lives of millions of Americans during a year of economic turbulence and cultural change. It is a bridge between the silver era of the past and the modern-clad coinage era that still defines U.S. quarters today. When you hold a 1987 Washington quarter, you are not just holding change, you are holding a piece of living history, one that connects to the artistry of John Flanagan, the legacy of George Washington, the strength of the American economy, and the culture of a nation that values both tradition and progress. This coin's story is not just about numismatics, but about America itself, and that is what makes it so captivating. The story of the 1972 Washington quarter begins not only with the coin itself, but with the long tradition of the Washington quarter series, which was first struck in 1932 to commemorate the bicentennial of George Washington's birth. The Treasury Department had sought to honor the first president of the United States with a coin that would reflect dignity, respect, and permanence, and after reviewing several designs, the portrait of Washington by sculptor John Flanagan was chosen based on the classical bust created in 1785 by French artist Jean-Antoine Houdon. This portrait became the enduring image that would remain on the quarter for decades, and by the time 1972 arrived, the Washington quarter had already been circulating for 40 years, solidifying its place as a staple of American coinage. The year 1972 itself was a time of transition and change in the United States socially, politically, and economically. The Vietnam War was still a defining issue. Richard Nixon was president, and the country was experiencing shifts in culture and society against this backdrop. The Washington quarter continued its role as both a common everyday coin and as a collectible for numismatists. It was minted in large numbers, yet the details of the 1972 issue tell a unique story of design, production, and value. The obverse of the 1972 Washington quarter carried the familiar profile of George Washington facing left, with the word liberty at the top, the phrase, "In God we trust," positioned. Just to the left of the portrait and the date 1972, clearly inscribed at the bottom, this design had become so iconic by this point that it symbolized American stability and tradition. The reverse design created by John Flanagan as well featured a majestic bald eagle with outstretched wings clutching a bundle of arrows in its talons and flanked by olive branches above the eagle. The words, "United States of America," were boldly inscribed with the denomination $quarter at the bottom, and the motto, E Pluribus Unum. Just above the eagle's head, this powerful image combined strength with peace, reflecting the dual character of the nation. From a technical standpoint, the 1972 Washington quarter was struck at 3 different mints. The Philadelphia Mint, which produced coins without a mint mark, the Denver Mint, which used the D Mint mark, and the San Francisco Mint, which produced proof coins bearing the S Mint mark. The Philadelphia and Denver coins were intended for general circulation, while the San Francisco proof issues were specially struck for collectors. The proof coins stood out because of their mirrored fields and frosted devices which displayed the artistry of the original design in its sharpest form. One of the most significant aspects of the 1972 Washington quarter is its composition. By this time, silver had already been removed from the quarter 5 years earlier in 1965 due to rising silver prices and public hoarding. Prior to that, quarters were 90% silver and 10% copper, but beginning in 1965, the mint introduced a clad composition consisting of an outer layer of copper nickel bonded to a pure copper core. The 1972 quarter followed this same standard with a total composition of 67% copper and 8.33% nickel. This change allowed the mint to continue producing large quantities of quarters without the risk of losing money to rising bullion values. The clad composition also gave the quarter its modern look and feel, with a silvery color that was harder and more resistant to wear than the older silver issues. The mintage numbers for the 1972 Washington quarter were significant, with hundreds of millions struck in Philadelphia and Denver combined. This ensured that the coin was readily available across the nation for everyday transactions. However, as with many coins, the large mintage did not prevent variations and errors from entering circulation. Some 1972 quarters displayed striking anomalies such as doubled dies, weak strikes off center strikes, and other minting mistakes, which became prized by collectors because of their rarity and uniqueness. Even today, certain varieties from 1972 remain highly collectible, with values depending on their condition. Rarity and visibility of the error, condition, and grading play an essential role in the story of the 1972 Washington quarter coins that circulated heavily in commerce. Naturally show signs of wear, with flattened hair details on Washington's portrait and worn feathers on the eagle, but uncirculated examples preserved straight from mint sets or rolls reveal the sharpness of the original design. And these high-grade coins, especially those graded Mint State 65 and above by professional grading services, carry strong collector premiums. Proof coins from San Francisco in deep cameo contrast are also valued highly for their aesthetic beauty and scarcity. In terms of numismatic context, the 1972 Washington quarter sits at an interesting place in history. The coin bridges the gap between the earlier silver issues and the modern clad era. It reflects the changing economic realities of the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the United States had to adapt its coinage to deal with inflation, rising commodity prices, and the demands of mass circulation. Yet despite these changes, the Washington quarter remained visually consistent, carrying the same portrait and reverse design that Americans had known for decades. This continuity gave the coin a sense of familiarity, even as the nation itself underwent dramatic transformations. Beyond its technical and artistic aspects, the 1972 quarter also represents an important chapter in the cultural life of the United States coins serve. as miniature historical documents reflecting the values and identity of a nation at a given time. The Washington Quarter in 1972 spoke to the enduring respect for the Founding Father, the reliance on national symbols like the eagle and the balancing. Of economic necessity with artistic tradition, it was both an object of daily use passed from hand to hand in stores and markets, and a piece of history waiting to be examined closely by collectors when examining the legacy of the 1972 Washington Quarter. It is essential to consider the broader Washington Quarter series itself, from its origin in 1932 through the clad transition of 1965 and into the later State Quarters program launched in 1999. The Washington Quarter has been one of the most versatile and widely collected coins in American history. The 1972 issue is a vital part of that legacy, representing the stability of the design while also embodying the modern materials and minting practices that would define the series for decades to come. Even today, 50 years later, the 1972 Washington Quarter remains a point of fascination for collectors, historians, and coin enthusiasts. Some search for high-grade mint state examples, others hunt for rare error coins, and still, others simply enjoy holding a piece of circulating history that connects directly back to the traditions of the United States Mint. For a collector building a date and mint mark set of Washington Quarters, the 1972 issues are indispensable, and for those interested in modern American coinage, they offer a fascinating study of design continuity, economic adaptation, and cultural symbolism. Thus, the 1972 Washington Quarter is not merely a piece of change, it is a snapshot of American history in metal, a continuation of a tradition that began with George Washington's bicentennial and one that would carry forward into the 21st century. Its design, its composition, its errors and varieties, and its cultural meaning all combine to make it a subject worthy of detailed study and appreciation for both novice collectors and advanced numismatists alike. The story of the 1980 Washington Quarter is far more than just a piece of metal with a face on one side and an eagle on the other. It is a story of American heritage, economic change, and numismatic tradition, all wrapped into a coin that millions of people carried in their pockets, yet only a fraction of them ever truly understood. When you hold a 1980 Washington Quarter, you are not just holding 25 cents of legal tender. You are holding a continuation of a design legacy that stretches back to the early 1930s, and a time when the United States wanted to honor its first president, George Washington, with a coin that would symbolize strength, unity, and leadership. The Washington Quarter series began in 1932, created to mark the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth, and the design chosen by the Treasury Department was the work of sculptor John Flanagan, who crafted an image of Washington based on the famous bust by French artist Jean-Antoine Houdon. That likeness would remain on the coin for decades with only subtle adjustments. And by the year 1980, the Washington Quarter had already been in circulation for nearly 50 years, carrying forward a sense of continuity through wars, recessions, and social changes. Now, by 1980, the American economy was facing a time of high inflation, rising interest rates, and shifting global trade markets. The value of money was being tested in new ways, and the quarter coin remained a critical part of everyday commerce in vending. Machines, parking meters, toll booths, and cash registers everywhere. The 1980 Washington Quarter itself was struck in two major minting facilities, Philadelphia and Denver, with coins bearing no mint mark for Philadelphia and the D mint mark for Denver. The San Francisco Mint also produced proof coins for collectors, which were struck with sharp details and mirror-like finishes, making them prized among numismatists. The Philadelphia Mint in 1980 was in fact one of the busiest facilities in the world, producing billions of coins to meet the growing demand of the American public, and the 1980 Washington Quarter played its part in keeping the economy flowing smoothly. The composition of the 1980 Washington Quarter was the same as the post. 1965 clad coins consisting of an outer layer of copper nickel bonded to a pure copper core. This was a significant change from the earlier silver quarters that had been minted prior to 1965, when the Coinage Act of 1965 removed silver from dimes. And quarters in response to rising silver prices. The clad composition gave the coin a distinctive look and feel with a more durable surface that could withstand heavy circulation. By 1980, the clad Washington quarter had already been in circulation for 15 years, and Americans had fully adjusted to the disappearance of silver, though collectors still cherished the older 90% silver quarters. When examining the design details of the 1980 quarter, the obverse, or front of the coin, retained John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington, his profile facing left with the word Liberty above his head and the motto, "In God We Trust." Placed to the left of his portrait beneath the neck, one would find the date, 1980, marking the year. Of minting on the reverse, the American eagle was still in full display, wings outstretched, clutching arrows, symbolizing readiness for defense, while standing above olive branches that symbolized peace. The words United States of America arched above. The eagle with the denomination $quarter inscribed below this design was simple, strong, and symbolic, making it one of the most enduring designs in American coinage. The 1980 Washington quarter also carried with it the subtle historical importance of being produced right before a major shift in American coin collecting. In 1982, the U.S. Mint eliminated mint marks from Philadelphia coins for a brief period, resulting in the famous 1982 No-P quarter. This makes the 1980 Philadelphia quarter one of the last standard P-less quarters before that dramatic shift. Another aspect that adds depth to the 1980 issue is its place in the larger historical timeline of Washington quarters, which by the 1990s would undergo the 50-state quarters program. A revolution in coin collecting that began in 1999 and forever changed the way Americans viewed their pocket change collectors today. Look back at the 1980 quarter as both common and yet significant billions were minted, which makes it a readily available coin in circulated condition. But for those who seek high-grade uncirculated examples or proof versions, the 1980 quarter can become a desirable addition to a serious collection. Mint state, coins graded MS-65 and above are particularly appealing because they capture the fine details of Flanagan's artistry without the heavy wear that most quarters endure in circulation-proof versions. Especially those struck in San Francisco stand out with their mirror-like fields and frosted devices, giving Washington's profile and the eagle on the reverse a striking contrast that regular business strikes cannot match. Beyond the coin itself, the 1980 Washington quarter reflects the culture and history of the late 1970s and early 1980s, an era of technological growth, the dawn of the computer age, the Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union, and a struggling American economy. Coins from this period become silent witnesses to the transactions that shaped people's daily lives. Whether it was buying a newspaper from a corner stand or using a payphone, which often required a quarter, the coin was everywhere, and its design reminded every American of the nation's founding father, George Washington, a symbol of resilience at a time when the country was pushing through challenges. As we dive deeper into the world of the 1980 Washington quarter, we see how every aspect of its production, distribution, and circulation tells a story, from the minting technology employed at the time to the engraver's dedication to preserving the classical portrait of Washington, from the changes in metallic composition that mirrored the economic realities of the 20th century to the collector values that grew around proof coins and mint. State survivors. This quarter serves as an entry point into a much larger narrative about American history, economy, and culture. So when you think of the 1980 Washington quarter, do not just see it as a simple coin worth 25 cents. Think of it as a time capsule from 1980, a year when the United States was wrestling with inflation, when the Washington quarter continued its role as an everyday workhorse coin, when the mint worked tirelessly to produce millions of coins to keep commerce moving, when collectors began to recognize that even common dates had stories worth telling. And when the portrait of George Washington remained an enduring symbol of leadership, strength, and continuity in American coinage, this is the true depth. Behind the coin that most people barely glance at, and yet it carries within it a story worthy of hours of exploration. Have you ever held a small 5-cent piece in your hand and wondered if it carried with it a hidden story, one that goes beyond the everyday exchange of goods and services, one that reveals a piece of American history, artistry, and economic design? The Jefferson nickel of 1975 is one such coin, a coin that on the surface might seem ordinary because millions were struck and used in circulation, but upon deeper exploration, it unfolds into a remarkable journey through numismatic history, minting, practices, and the American spirit that continued to define coinage during the mid-1970s. The 1975 Jefferson nickel belongs to a long line of coins that started in 1938 when the United States Mint decided to replace the Buffalo nickel with a design honoring the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, and the structure most closely associated with him, Monticello, the neoclassical home he designed in Virginia. The nickel design, created by Felix Schlag, became one of the longest running coin designs in American history, and by 1975 it had already been in production for nearly 4 decades through war shortages, minting changes, and countless economic shifts. The year 1975 itself is significant in American numismatic history, because it stands right before one of the most important bicentennial celebrations in United States coinage, the bicentennial of 1976, that introduced new quarter, half dollar, and dollar coin designs. However, the Jefferson nickel was not changed. For the bicentennial, instead, it retained its classic Schlag design and continued to be a workhorse coin in circulation. The 1975 nickel thus represents a fascinating point in the timeline. It was a coin bridging the years before the bicentennial, without fanfare, yet maintaining the legacy of Jefferson on the 5-cent piece. In 1975, the nickel was struck at 3 main facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia produced the 1975 Jefferson nickels without a mint mark. Denver used the D mint mark, and San Francisco issued proof coins with the S mint mark. These variations are critical to collectors because while millions were struck, not all coins survived in pristine condition. Circulation wear quickly reduced sharpness of design, and many coins ended up lost, damaged, or melted. The proof issues from San Francisco are especially sought after because they were not meant for circulation but for collectors and were struck with polished dies, giving them mirror-like finishes that stand in contrast to regular issues. The composition of the 1975 Jefferson nickel remained the same as it had been since the end of World War II. It was made of a copper-nickel alloy consisting of 75% copper and 25% nickel. This gave it durability and a distinctive silvery appearance. During the war years, the alloy had been temporarily changed to include silver due to wartime shortages. But by 1975, the original copper-nickel formula had long been restored. This composition was chosen not only for its resilience but also for the way it worked in vending machines, which became an increasingly important factor in coin design during the 20th century. From a design perspective, the 1975 Jefferson nickel carried Schlag's classic portrait of Jefferson on the obverse, his profile facing left with the word "Liberty" to the left, the motto, "In God We Trust," and the date, 1975, clearly visible. The reverse showed Monticello, Jefferson's home, with its domed architecture and neoclassical balance. The inscriptions "Monticello e Pluribus Unum" and "United States of America." 5 cents framed the design. This design had remained largely unchanged since 1938, though over the years slight modifications had been made to improve detail and clarity. Collectors today analyze the 1975 Jefferson nickel, not just for its basic history, but also for the many varieties and errors that arose in its production. The mid-1970s saw high mintages, but also saw instances of striking anomalies, including off-center strikes, weak strikes, and die breaks that created fascinating error coins which now command significant interest in the numismatic market. Proof nickels from San Francisco in deep cameo condition, where the raised design appears frosty against mirror fields, are particularly desirable and can bring high values when graded by professional services. The coin's historical context adds another layer of richness to its story. America in 1975 was a nation in transition, still healing from the Vietnam War, adjusting to economic pressures of inflation and oil crises, and looking forward to the bicentennial celebration of 1976. Coins like the 1975 nickel served not just as currency, but as daily reminders of continuity and tradition. Jefferson's face on the coin reflected ideals of liberty, knowledge, and innovation, which were especially resonant during times of challenge. The nickel was small, yet symbolic, an object of everyday life. Carrying profound meaning for 2 hours, one can trace the path of this coin from its origins in Schlag's winning design in 1938 through the wartime silver nickels of the 1940s into the post-war era of mass circulation and vending machine culture. And finally into the mid-1970s, when the United States Mint continued to strike billions of coins annually. The 1975 Jefferson nickel is a chapter in this evolving narrative, a coin that, despite its abundance, retains importance for collectors, historians, and ordinary Americans who unknowingly carried a piece of that story in their pockets. When examining the 1975 nickel in a professional numismatic context, we must also look at the grading scale used to assess its condition. Coins range from poor and heavily worn to mint state examples with full steps on Monticello, a designation that refers to the clarity of the steps on the building's design. These full-step nickels are highly prized because they demonstrate a strong strike and preservation. From circulation in 1975, full-step examples are scarcer and command premiums because most nickels from that year did not survive with such detail intact. The lasting legacy of the 1975 Jefferson nickel is not that it introduced a dramatic new design or commemorated a historic event, but rather that it quietly carried forward the tradition of Jefferson's place on the nickel as America prepared for its bicentennial. The coin is a reminder that even in years of continuity, coins reflect the values, priorities, and craftsmanship of their time. Collectors treasure it for its varieties, proof issues, and condition rarities, while historians see it as part of a broader narrative of American coinage. So when you hold a 1975 Jefferson nickel in your hand, you are not just holding a small 5-cent piece. You are holding a continuation of a story that began in 1938. You are holding a coin that passed through millions of transactions in an America that was changing rapidly. You are holding a piece of artistry struck in copper and nickel that connected past, present, and future, and you are holding a symbol of Jefferson's enduring legacy on American money. Imagine holding in your hand a coin that represents not only a small piece of American currency, but also a window into the history of the United States. During one of its most turbulent decades, the Jefferson nickel, minted in 1968, is more than just a 5-cent piece. It is a reflection of American culture, politics, economics, and artistry from the time of its creation to the modern era. And when we talk about the 1968 Jefferson nickel, we step into a fascinating story that ties together the legacy of Thomas Jefferson, the craftsmanship of Felix Schlag, who designed the coin in the late 1930s, and the broader events of the late 1960s that shaped America in ways that are still felt today. The year 1968 was a year of transformation and turmoil in the United States. The country was dealing with the aftermath of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. The Vietnam War was raging. Protests were erupting across college campuses, and American society was grappling with questions of civil rights, democracy, and its place in the world. In this charged atmosphere, the Mint continued its responsibility of producing coinage for everyday commerce, and among the most familiar pieces struck during that year was the Jefferson nickel, first introduced in 1938 as a replacement for the Buffalo nickel. The Jefferson nickel was designed by German-born sculptor Felix Schlag, who won a national competition to design the coin in 1938. The obverse features a left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson III, President of the United States, author of the Declaration of Independence, and a central figure in American democracy. The reverse features his famous Virginia estate Monticello, which Jefferson himself designed and which stands as a symbol of his intellect and his contradictions, as both an advocate for liberty and a man who owned enslaved people by 1968. Schlag's design had been circulating for 3 decades, and the coin had become a trusted staple in American pockets, purses, and cash registers. Now, what makes the 1968 Jefferson nickel particularly interesting is not just the design itself, but the context of minting in that specific year. Prior to 1968, all proof coins had been struck. In Philadelphia, however, beginning in 1968, proof production was moved permanently to the San Francisco Mint. This marked a turning point in the history of American coinage. The 1968 proof Jefferson nickels struck at San Francisco with the S Mint mark became the very first modern proof coins to carry that designation. Collectors instantly recognized these pieces as significant because they marked the revival of proof coinage after a 3-year hiatus between 1965 and 1967. During that suspension, proof and uncirculated mint sets were replaced with so-called special mint sets, which did not achieve the same level of mirror-like finish and sharp detail that collectors loved. The return of proof coins in 1968, with the Jefferson nickel leading the way, restored a sense of artistry and tradition to American numismatics. The circulation strikes of the 1968 nickel also have a story of their own. The coins were minted at 3 facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Unlike Philadelphia nickels of earlier years, which carried no mint mark, the 1968 issues introduced a permanent change. All mint marks now appeared on the obverse of the coin, just below Jefferson's portrait on the right side near the rim. This was a significant modification, because for decades the placement of mint marks had been a subject of debate, and in 1965 the mint had even removed mint marks entirely to discourage coin hoarding during a nationwide shortage. When the mint marks returned in 1968, their new position on the obverse signaled both a design shift and a renewed sense of transparency for collectors and the general public. In terms of mintage, the 1968 nickels struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco circulated widely and were used in everyday commerce across the country. These were not rare in general circulation, but certain varieties and conditions became valuable over time. For example, proof strikes from San Francisco that were particularly well preserved or featured deep cameo contrasts between frosted devices and mirrored fields grew in demand among collectors. Similarly, circulation strikes with full steps on the Monticello reverse, a grading designation that refers to sharp and complete detail in the depiction of the steps, became especially sought after, since most coins did not strike with that level of clarity due to the mint's high-speed production. Understanding the historical role of the 1968 nickel also requires a look at how coinage fit into the broader economic situation of the late 1960s. Inflation was beginning to take hold, and the United States was still adjusting to the removal of silver from its coinage earlier in the decade, while nickels never contained silver except for the wartime alloy years. Between 1942 and 1945, when nickel was needed for the war effort, the public had grown accustomed to seeing design and compositional changes across coin denominations. The Jefferson nickel stood as one of the few coins whose design and metallic composition remained unchanged during this time. Its stability provided a kind of continuity amidst economic uncertainty. Collectors often point out that the 1968 Jefferson nickel is a coin of transitions. It represents the transition from Philadelphia to San Francisco, for proof strikes the transition of mint mark placement to the obverse, the transition back to proof production after the special mint set years, and the broader transition of America itself through a decade of upheaval and change. While a single 5-cent piece may seem insignificant, it reflects the story of a nation striving to balance tradition with change and stability with innovation. To truly appreciate the 1968 Jefferson nickel, you have to think about the layers of meaning it carries at the surface. It is simply a common coin struck in the millions and used in daily transactions at gas stations, diners, and grocery stores. But for numismatists, it is an artifact of design, history, monetary policy, and cultural symbolism. The details of its production, the choices made by the mint, and the reception by collectors all combine to give this coin a depth that extends far beyond its face value. By the time you finish studying the history of the 1968 Jefferson nickel, you realize that no coin exists in isolation. Every detail, from the placement of a mint mark to the shine of a proof finish, tells a story about the people who made it, the time in which it was struck, and the values that shaped the nation. And that is why, when you hold a 1968 nickel in your hand, you are not just holding a piece of metal, you are holding a chapter in American history.